Okay, so thank you everybody for coming. This is our first GradTrack workshop of the spring semester, and I'm really excited to have Dr. Brooke Wheeler here tonight. She's an assistant professor of aviation science in the College of Aeronautics, and she's going to share some strategies with us on how to succeed in group projects.
Thank you. So thank you guys for coming. I know evenings are always busy. So group projects are a part of my teaching, and I've been teaching using group projects for over a decade now. And so I've played around with different options with groups and read literature on the pedagogy of using group projects. And I have personally, from my student experience, somewhat of a love-hate relationship with projects. But as a professor, I feel like it's very important as part of your learning experience to actually be hands-on in group projects. And so that's, that's one of the reasons that I'm interested in group projects and that I'm here giving the talk. So I'm going to go through the kind of why we do group projects, some of the problems that sometimes come up in group projects, some strategies that you can use in the future to improve your group work, and then we're going to hopefully put it into practice and do some problem solving for some scenarios of what might happen in a group. And just to clarify, with groups, I'm talking about generically anything in a, whether it's a collaboration setting if you're doing research, or if you're in a class and you have a project with more than one person. And those are long-term, and so typically the literature says that's a team project because you're working for a period of time together. You can also do group work and group projects in a shorter term setting, like a discussion. And a lot of the same strategies apply. You just don't have to do as much long-term planning ahead, and making sure that you have internal deadlines with your group. So this picture here is my aviation research class at the end of last semester, and what you'll notice is we have one of our librarians here, a bunch of our students grouped around their posters. These are all group projects. They work as a term project the whole semester, and they actually plan, conduct, and report on their research. And so this is an example, and I've had to implement a lot of these strategies with these groups, but this cohort in particular, despite having some hiccups in their initial group formation, had a really excellent experience. And so I think we'll talk about some of the examples from that when we get to the application. So why group work? It is a best practice in teaching, so the pedagogy says that students benefit from group work. As a teacher and as a student, it's not always easier, but you learn, and the learning is really the pro here. You get social aspects, psychological benefits, you can build a study group that comes out of your project, and the learning is more problem solving. It's active versus passive learning. You have better engagement with the learning process because you're involved and you are a teacher. Students learn better when they have that opportunity to teach someone else. And so when you have a bunch of students come together, the group functions as several teachers who may teach different parts of things. If you're good at editing, you can step in and teach someone else how to do that. Or if you're the computer science person, you can help with the coding. And that's something that you really can't do if you're in an individual situation. So the other piece of the learning literature says that when students are discussing, they learn things and remember things better. So anything that you can do to engage with other people in the classroom is going to promote the learning outcomes. So that's really the learning side of this. The next reason is the final product. And this is by far and away just worlds of a difference. What you can do by yourself is not the same as what you can do with someone else or with two other people. It's the idea of two minds are always better than one. You have that much more time, energy, effort, and expertise. You can find someone, if you get to create your own group, who complements your skills, so you can get a whole nother skill set to boot. And you also have an increase in creativity. So that's idea generation, different perspectives, you get to learn about different approaches, and that moves the end product, just in my experience, light years beyond what it would have been if they were individual projects. This also opens up for graduate students some really exciting opportunities, I think, because you can, if you do your group work right, actually have a collaboration that spins off into publishable research. So you guys as grad students have the skills to come together in a group and make a product that you can either present at a conference or publish in a journal. And so that, I would say, for you guys, should be a goal going into any group work study. You have these experts and minds coming together, you should capitalize on that, even though it's a class, and see if you can get something that really is a public final product out of it. And I think that from the beginning, when you have multiple people to bounce those ideas off of, it can really open up some avenues that you might not have thought of if you were just starting on your own. So, the last main approach that you see in the literature and that I feel like I like to design into my classes is the transferable learning. If I'm just having you memorize something, yes, you're learning about the subject, but that's not really helpful. You can do that on your own. You're perfectly capable. But if you're actually doing things that you will be doing when you either go into industry or go into academia or work for an organization, that's learning that I get excited about because it's really useful. And so anytime you're interacting in a group, it's obviously building your social skills, your communication skills, your planning skills, your organization skills, but also your leadership skills. And that's, you inevitably need to be a leader, whether you are the leader in the group or leading from the side. You have to develop those skills when you're in a group, and that applies if you're in business or in academia. So I think that this is a huge benefit to a team project or a group situation. So the last thing here is, particularly for those of you in the sciences, this is the way we're moving. We do interdisciplinary research, we do large team projects. You're often publishing with others. If you're an engineer, this is even more true. You work on a team with a project manager. So being able to collaborate is critical. It also will promote your research and your learning. So for me, the initial place to start anytime you have a group project is from these reasons. You want to really focus on, this is why we're doing this, and this is what I'm going to get out of it. So regardless of how the group process goes, you are learning real skills that you will be using. And as graduate students, a lot of the times your class projects can be actual research projects, whether it's a literature review or a proposal that you could actually send to a granting agency and get funding to conduct with your group, or if you can have a conference presentation. So I would say that going into this, that's a really solid start for why to do research together and why to work in classes together. So the problem is that a lot of people, and I would say for you as graduate students, most of you have at some point had a negative group project in the past, and this leaves us with some kind of concern. And so we want to think about what the challenges are. So first, focus on the positive. This is what we're going to get out of this. But we also want to know about the challenges so that hopefully we can head them off with a pass. And there are several challenges that may pop up. In the literature, we see a lot of things, including the fact that there's communication challenges. If you're working by yourself, everything's in your own head, you don't have to communicate with anyone. If you're working in a group, communication is essential. We also have to make sure that everyone's on the same page. So if the group members have different goals, say, I want a conference paper and you just want to pass the course, that's going to create some conflict. So we all need to get on the same page and have the same goals, or at least know what our compromise is. There's also the issue of roles. Things have to get done in groups, and usually that works best if we have tasks and roles and we delegate and move forward in that respect. So there's some component of leadership and organization that goes into groups. And if that doesn't happen, then people get confused and balls get dropped when we're juggling too many tasks. So the planning component is key there. And then there's two very common roles that pop up. One is the controller, the person who just has to do it all because they need to be in charge, and then no one else gets to have input. And the freeloader, which is your stereotypical group member who is along for the ride and benefiting from the work that everyone else is putting in. So most groups want to avoid those. The other two challenges that come up are motivation, and this is something that I think at the graduate level we don't see as much. You guys are highly motivated people, you're here to get a degree, and you're really excited about what you're studying in. So I see this more in undergraduate and lower level projects. But you can be a leader in your group by promoting the motivation and reminding everybody of the end goal. And the other student challenge that comes up a lot is schedule. And so we have a lot of great tools that can help us virtually get together if your schedules don't mesh, or to do things asynchronously. So you do something and pass it off to me and I finish it. But scheduling is something that my students repeatedly say is a challenge for them. So these are the main things that we see popping up as problems when groups go awry. So at this point, I'm going to switch gears and start talking about some strategies that you can do to make sure you're ready for your group work and hopefully head off these issues at the pass. The framing of the teamwork is really important, and so that's where I started today. All of those benefits to your learning, to your skills that you can then use in your job, those are the takeaways even beyond whatever you learn about your subject matter and what you create as a project in your class. I will say that attitude is important. So it's helpful if you can cheer your team on and get them in the mood for the group work. So that's the remember the why. You also want to make sure that you keep that motivation high, and that's throughout the course of the project. The next one is communication, and this is something that pretty much in any group you can get past this if you work at it, and it's mostly planning. So I gave you a handout on group goal setting, and one of the things that I've implemented in my courses is a group goal setting. Anytime a group starts, it's going to be more than just a discussion group for a class. And the goal of this process is to communicate. You want to do it early, and so that's why I say at the beginning, you sit down with your group and you share information. So some of the things you might want to share, and this isn't a you have to, it's really what works for you and your partners. You want to share the best way to contact you and figure that out as a group. We've got plenty of different ways to communicate, but if I'm backlogged on my email and never check it, and you only text, if I don't know that, we're never going to communicate very well. So if you go ahead and say that at the beginning, it makes the whole process a lot easier. And you as a group can decide how you're going to communicate, whether that's text or chat or on the phone or snail mail, who knows. But you have to figure that out. And so this process of putting all your cards on the table is really beneficial in planning, because then you don't get this surprise when you figure out that you're one of those people who needs to have your project done 2 days in advance, or you'll get an ulcer, and your group members don't start until 10 minutes before it's due. If you know that ahead of time, you can plan ahead and have an internal deadline. If you don't know that, things will pop up and it will be a problem. So you want to tell people how you work, when you work, when you'll be available. That doesn't mean share your whole life. It just means let your group know how you function. This takes some level of self-awareness to be able to do that, but it does tend to help because you know from the beginning how to move forward. You can also use this group goal setting to set ground rules. Sometimes professors do that, but if the professor doesn't tell you these are the rules of the group, it's best if you come up with a plan. So that might be having internal deadlines to make sure that you will have the work done on time, or it might be what to do if things aren't working out. So having check-ins regularly so that you can make sure that things are on track. The other part of the goals and expectations that I think is a difference, and there's some research that shows that this is a difference between professors and students if we're talking about a class situation, and that is that there's a difference in expectation of workload for group projects. So most of my students have a mental image that looks like the lower right-hand corner. Group work, yes, I am doing 1/3 of the work. And my mental image, based on my experience, is more like the Venn diagram at the top. If you have 3 people are putting in 100% of the effort, and it may not totally overlap because we're doing slightly different tasks, but you're getting 300% effort rather than 3 people giving 33% of their time and effort. So however you want to envision this, setting that expectation with your group members is important because you do want everyone to contribute and you want to know how they're going to contribute. So having that discussion at the beginning helps. And I do think that moving towards this mental image helps to raise the bar and get commitment from all the group members to be actively involved in the whole process. The research does show that if you have this discussion and you actually commit to, these are my tasks, I'm going to do this, you're a lot more likely to follow through and do it. If the tasks weren't clear, you didn't talk about it, you don't know what you're agreeing to, it may not happen. And so that's another way that you can move towards everyone contributing to the workload. Communication may seem simple because we have all these different ways of doing it, but different people do tend to favor particular modes of communication. So it's always helpful to have that discussion with your group and figure out what are we going to use for our communication. And this is by no means an extensive list. You guys have a million other ways to communicate, but these are some of the standards that people use. My students doing group work have relied heavily now on the web. So we can put anything in the cloud. You can use OneDrive, you can use Dropbox, you can use Google Drive, and that lets you share files very quickly and easily. We also have tools on Canvas. If you have a group on Canvas, you actually have a file that's for your group and you can share files that way. You can have a group discussion that way so it doesn't clutter your inbox, for example. And the library has some great resources for sharing citations and sources in RefWorks. And so I strongly recommend, particularly as graduate students, that you check out RefWorks and other citation managers to have an easier way to manage all your sources, because you guys do a lot of research and that's a great way to share those sources and make sure that your group from the beginning, again this is a part 1 kind of planning, has access to everything. Because if your communication cuts down at some point, if your group members still have access to all the files, they can still keep things going. But if the file is only with you, then it's going to be really hard for people to keep moving forward in your absence. Role definition. This is the other problem that can crop up. We generally envision a project, whether that's an assigned project for a class or a research project that you come up with and want to collaborate with people on. And so one of the things that has to happen is to figure out who does what. And that's both the actual work as well as the roles within the group. And I would stress that the roles that everyone should be doing in contributing are first to listen and learn. So obviously someone has to share ideas, But part of establishing a good group rapport is the listening to the different perspectives and ideas and acknowledging that we all have something to learn from each other. Everybody brings different skills, different backgrounds, and different perspectives to the table, and so you should acknowledge those and incorporate them, or at least learn from them along the way. Everyone should be proactive in actually taking on roles. So you can volunteer to take on roles, you can volunteer to take on work, you can also throw out ideas such as how can I help with this, or what should I be doing? We typically have some standard roles that come up. Leaders, so the person who goes point on directing the whole group. We typically have someone who does the recording, taking the notes, making sure everybody has an email of reminding them what to do. We all should be creating because we're contributing to the actual generative process in the project. And we need to have at least one person who's playing the role of questioner. This is another thing that I get in my students. I always ask them, what's your advice to future students who are doing group work? And one of them is to really make sure that you're on track for whatever the prompt for the project is. Like, do what you're supposed to be doing. And so having a questioner who's checking that and asking, is this appropriate? Are we doing all the things we're supposed to be doing? Is helpful. The questioner is also helpful to push you to do the best you can do. So in science, we want to always be making sure we're considering our assumptions and that we're not forgetting about potential variables that we should be controlling for. So asking questions and forcing the group to actually think through and problem solve is really a useful role to make sure that someone's filling that role. And although the leader may be doing this, it's really important for everyone to keep the motivation high as far as being positive, focusing on either the end goal or what we're getting out of our group work, and encouraging the group. And so part of that encouragement is providing the positive feedback of, wow, that's a really great idea. I'm so glad that you found that article because I never would have looked in the other database to learn about this. And so even if it's a simple acknowledgement of what your group mates bring, that promotes respect and increases the synergy that the group has. The other thing that I wanted to stress about roles is that we're hopefully moving towards an interdependence, not a codependence, or because we're doing group work, it's not independence. You really are working with other people. And this goes hand in hand with research projects and collaborative efforts. We're coming together, sometimes across disciplines, to create something that we couldn't do on our own. We need other experts. We need other information. And so creating a group where you are working together and relying on each other in a positive way to go further than we can go on our own is where we want to go with our role definition. Project management. So this doesn't apply if we're just doing a group discussion or a one-time short group project, but anything that's long-term or large, if you're doing an actual research project with collaborators, you need to plan. So planning will take care of a lot of the issues that can come up in groups. And so if you have a group leader, they can actually play a large role in this. We have a lot of electronic tools to help us with this, everything from calendars to Trello, and even just having a document where you're planning out what's going to happen in your project and who's going to do it can work well for planning this. If you have a large project, having smaller pieces along the way is the best plan to actually get to your end goal on time. Procrastination happens to the best of us, even if we don't like to procrastinate. So having the shorter pieces of the project due along the way with an internal deadline, make sure that you are moving forward and you're on track and you don't end up against a deadline that you can't meet. So for project management, planning is the emphasis here, and the leadership component of this is working together as a group, and that's everyone, to hold each other accountable, that you are moving forward incrementally and you will be ready with a complete project at the end of whenever your deadline is. And the next piece that is really a meta level issue, it involves self-awareness, and so you may be aware for yourself, but once you start interacting with your colleagues, you have to start being aware for your group. How are we interacting? How are we doing? Checking in regularly. So in my group projects, I require regular check-ins where you do a self-evaluation. If you don't have that built in, and even if you're just doing an actual research collaboration with your colleagues, it's always good to check in. So part of this is making sure that we're moving forward, and part of it is how are we doing? Is there anything we can do better? And so it's not just a negative thing. You want to focus on being as efficient as possible and functioning as well as you can, whether that's tweaking your communication that you're using or meeting more often. But one of the books that I've been listening to on my commutes is asking a bunch of questions and showing how those questions can be applied in real life. And so these are some of the questions that I think would be particularly useful in a group setting to say, I wonder why things are working this way. And that's a very non-confrontational way to say, how can we move this along and do it better? Yeah?
So I was just having a quick question with the Ride in 2017 is like what did the author look at? Is that situational awareness or?
This is just it. Ryan is just talking about basically life experiences and how to approach everything, and so he is suggesting that these simple questions can help us sometimes to build consensus. The second one, can't we all agree? And I think if you're in a group setting and, for example, you're trying to figure out what your topic should be, and so we have several proposals on the table. One of the ways you could move that forward if you're at a stalemate is to say, can't we all agree that what we should do is get started, go to the library, get some research, and then we'll discuss where to go from there, because it will be clear which topic is better after we learn a little bit about it. So finding the consensus from that second question. And then the how can I help is, even if you're not currently in the leader role, that's one way that you can step in and offer to take on some of the task and move the group forward that way. I think that this check-in is a way to take what hopefully you already know about yourself and what you're learning about your group members and iteratively improve. So even if things aren't working great, you can still make adjustments and have a very positive group experience as you move along. And the reality is, particularly if we're in a class and you have a project, we have to keep going because you have a deadline and you need a final product. So one of the things that I have done when the worst case scenarios happen in my groups is I sit with my groups and we do that self-analysis of, okay, what happened? I wonder why we're in this situation. What didn't go as planned? And then the next question is, how can we avoid that in the future, and how can we move on from here? And so what that has to be is that it has to be a hard reset. So what that means is, just like if you're wiping a computer and starting over with nothing on the memory, you need to let whatever happened go and move forward together to get to your end goal, whether that's a literature review or a senior design project or an actual research project that you're collaborating on. So learning from whatever happened and moving forward to make things better in the future. So for you guys as graduate students, there's a whole lot of group work that happens that's very applicable to you. The first one that comes to my mind is your committee. And obviously this is a different kind of group work setting because you're the graduate student and they are basically your advisors and critiquing you and making sure that you are following appropriate research protocols. But at the same time, during the process of graduate school, you're becoming their peer and collaborator. And so you have to step into that role of being a researcher and a collaborator with them. And part of that is your interactions with your committee. And so you want to be taking on, in that case, you really should be taking on the leadership role with your research and using them as subject matter experts and communicating with them on a regular basis to show both your progress and to get feedback and advice on particular issues that you need more input on. So planning your committee is one way that you can think about creating a group that works for you, choosing people who not only have the expertise, but hopefully who you also can interact with well in a group setting. The other things that graduate students kind of encounter are you're stepping into a teaching role. So you may be a TA in a lab, for example. So again, that's a place where you're acting more as the professor and the teacher, and you may be creating groups for other students. So a couple of things about group size, if you're in the role where you're actually creating the groups. The typical size that most professors and students prefer is around 2 to 4 students. If you get larger, the larger the group, the less work people do, and so you have an increased rate of the freeloader happening. So you want to keep the group small, but hopefully large enough that you can still get diverse input and have different students bringing their expertise. You can also create your own groups that can be very beneficial in graduate school for both studying for your courses and your comps and to promote your writing. Writing is an ongoing process for anyone in graduate school and in academia, and also outside of academia. If you're seeking research funding, you're always writing proposals. And it is very helpful to create a group for yourself that holds you accountable for continually writing and revising, and also provides you the benefit of feedback. So you can create a writing group, and it doesn't even have to be people in your discipline who will meet with you regularly, give you that accountability, and challenge you to think about whatever you need to think about to improve your writing. And so that's another type of group that is particularly pertinent for graduate students and that you are more in control of than, say, a project group in a class. Okay, so we're going to pause my talking now and actually put this into application. I have some scenarios that are, some of these are actual scenarios. I got input from the COA graduate students. There are also some scenarios that are totally hypothetical, I made up, and some that I've encountered in previous group work. So these are some things a little off to, there's a big problem in these groups. And so what I want you to think about is, first of all, what happened? So this is the meta level awareness of what went wrong. And secondly, what strategies could have been applied earlier in this group to avoid this? And lastly, what would you do if this was the current group situation you were in? How would you move forward? So I'm going to ask everybody to go to this side so that we can get into groups. Let's have 2 groups, and we'll see how many of these we can get through. You can join whatever group you want to.
No offense.
No problem.
But then again, there's some sort of influence here as one of my informants for my interview. So I don't know if that's leading to manipulation or should I go?
It should be.
Oh, sure.
That's
Sure. Oh, that one I say, no offense, no offense, no. It's just a joke, just a joke. Please. Yeah, real member opinion. Unless you have purple. No, no. No purple.
Right,
Right.
Sorry, blue is purple, so
and within the team charter, there's always that aspect of clarifying the roles and understand what their strengths and weaknesses are as well. So, but I think like the situation, in that situation, two things to tackle is, okay, so now you have 1 hour, what to do at this time, which is really gathering all the resources you have within your team, and just doing that part, regardless of whatever can happen. Because
So we have
the final
leadership
deliverable is still the most important thing. Then the solution of the future thing is to have a system in place, team charter, always have a backup plan in case of these things happen.
There's supposed to be 3 separate.
Yeah.
scenarios.
Okay, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So 3%.
We did medical mass citation appropriately.
What happened?
I mean, that means that just means that, I'm doing medical really not always follow under my philosophy and everything is just like, if the team member doesn't do it well, just do it, but always prepare to do whatever the team can do.
I was thinking like this.
In that case where it is that like you have one person who understands it really well, just get that done, get it out of the way, and then have.
It's a story.
Just give a copy of this.
What happened?
Okay, well, you need to do this. For future reference, you should run the agreement with all of the clear leader, pass on other side.
Again, it's the real thing is to be
Distractions.
So this is really good for some of that.
Right.
Make sure that people have a clear, roles to
Workload.
Right.
roles, and so they understand.
The other one's development.
That's the very
Right.
scientific and
So
have
now,
Right, just immediately and then the rest of the time. And actually, at this point, practically it's the sound, team building is really helpful at this point.
Are they scheduling that about time?
And have a communication, that's really communication going, talk about their strengths and weaknesses that they should do in the process, and then go into that role, clarifying what they can do, and what they, that each one of them should do. One thing that's really common is idea, remember,
you can say it's
I was just reading this an article about this
because I
actually.
find based on my experience, if it's a required focus, there's more motivation.
Typically happen when you assign a formal leader within a team, and then that leader has specific powers, and they just do it, they get shut down, and like, something about it. That's the case, is you really have someone,
Yeah, so I
have a higher up, like a professor, tell that person that, hey, your team member have something to say too, and usually having that intervention from someone higher than them, so let them know what, which is like have the element of instrumentality in it, and they know what to do.
clearly outlined the deadlines.
So I think
She
that's.
used that term on
Yeah.
controller, either the slacker, the freeloader, or
Right.
the controller.
And then having
The extreme on that side, and yeah, I agree, you have to go higher up,
Right.
because once the team is assigned to this person, it's a leadership role. It doesn't really understand what those
Right.
They haven't been getting so fast in the beginning before.
So all you guys have to remind them that, have someone to let them know, hey, your team member has something to say that you do as well. So and then that's all it takes. Like, there's not much else you can really do.
Like playing poker, if I up the ante, you get more motivation to improve your hand. Oh,
They're
so-
the same one.
no, so-
So tell the professors not a choice, right?
Right.
Oh,
Are you guys close?
We're close on the first one.
Okay, it's fine. Take a few more minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Is there some sort of penalty for not?
Bad grades.
Get it done ahead of time.
Yeah.
Set a clear timeline ahead of time on when things is due
Say,
and what is
try to
supposed to be
get the
done.
courses deadlines.
And then
more
establish a
quickly.
system of
Since
accountability.
you're so busy with other courses, there's a better time.
Get ahead of yourself and have someone
If they
remind
can
you,
meet
this is
virtually
what
with
it's
them
due,
or
you need to get it done now.
Yeah, and maybe also part of the goal in the future, communication piece, because we've met with them anyway, but just to right now.
So when creating options or choices.
Yeah, this interesting.
Flexibility.
Things,
Flexibility, but then they're still like.
Again.
I actually had this happen once. And surprisingly.
And you can't force them. They can work.
So what was the resolution?
Resolution? Unfortunately, anything along the academic
But you could
ethics and
ask what.
what I did is I approached that person and said, hey, this definitely needs to be written, this is not okay. And of course, they're always gonna
This
have
is
something
really
along the lines of
challenging.
excuse, so then you bring it to your academic integrity and like, listen, yeah, I'm not tolerating this, and then I just understand, like, I mean, just be ready to pick up the slack, is what I'm always gonna approach that as, so.
Right, I like, as work environments, it's completely different, but.
When it's magical, like, no,
Yeah.
I'm not dealing with that.
Word.
Yeah.
I don't even know.
Okay,
That would be involve third party.
Yes.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, again, because the problem that I encounter is that we have such international students, and people coming from different areas and different institutions and different countries, don't have the same time goals.
Right.
It is a
So
motivation
where I
right
am,
here,
what
want to take on.
goes and what doesn't, what, it almost feel like we should have one
I've never had that
course of
problem.
this.
My problem is the suspect though, suspect versus actually doing is another very different thing, you don't accuse someone of such a thing.
You're like, oh, you're looking at it,
Right.
Side by
Yeah.
side.
I mean, another conversation could be done is really just going back to that goal setting aspect and like, hey, here's what is going on, let's get back to the goal, let's get this done correctly. Nothing, so.
I mean, if they could create a schedule and delegate tasks together. Right.
To be fair, it's not fair because I'm a senior researcher.
Oh, wow. So.
Okay then?
Okay, well, we'll just turn over this portion to you for solving our team issues. Is it okay if we
Yeah,
go ahead
sure,
and go
yeah,
through and we'll
absolutely.
see how many of these we can get
Okay.
through?
Yeah.
So, I think
Define
I've
rules.
tried to mix these up so that we'll go from different groups. So the first scenario was that two group members are doing their part, coming to the meetings, doing their work, and the third group member shows up at meetings but always has an excuse and hasn't done any work. So how do we assess this and how do we move forward?
Do you want to be the leader on this one? So we thought that, you know, that maybe the other group members weren't holding, we were going from like what happened, how to avoid and move forward, that
Yeah.
maybe there was no accountability, that the group members 2 and 3 weren't holding number 1 as accountable for doing this work. But that doesn't really solve the issue, so then we were saying maybe there was scheduling issues, or maybe we could say, how can we help you get this work done, kind of thing. And then how to avoid in the future, kind of go into the project management piece, like having deadlines, communicating if you need another day, that sort of thing, so kind of trying to make the resolutions.
Yes.
And then move forward, just have a timeline, work out a timeline together. Haley kind of said, like, you can't make somebody do their work, so what
Right.
do you do in that case, really?
Yeah, so any other recommendations for the person who is not pulling their weight?
I was just saying earlier, one thing is always understand, like when you're working in the team, always prepare to have a backup plan and always have someone pick up the slack, because unfortunately, the end result is not how much each person can contribute, but the end result of the team is that your team successfully complete that. So regardless of what it is, that if that person is not doing it, like, you're just gonna have, like, remind them once they don't do it well, someone's just gonna pick up the slack and just move the other person off.
Yeah, so I think that in a lot of respects, it's a great attitude to have as a group member. The willingness to step up and make sure that things happen, and the project management side of it that you guys were describing is the best, I think, proactive approach. If you notice this happening, that person's gonna have an earlier internal deadline so that you have time to have your backup plan go into play. And the other side of this that I always tell my groups when they're forming is that life does happen, and so the professional response, I think, is to give some benefit of the doubt. You know, relatives die, people get sick, all of these things will happen to us at some point. And if you can anticipate that you're going to not be able to carry your load, you have to ask for help or delegate to someone. And it's best if you can do some work ahead, do extra work ahead, and then pass it off to your teammates. If you can't, you have to contribute extra on the back end of this. Otherwise, the group basically is excluding you and carrying you. If you're in a collaborative, not a class situation, but if you're doing a research collaboration, if you end up not contributing, you're not an author. And so you don't get to be part of the awesome end product. So I think that we all have times when we can't contribute exactly what we should be, and the way you make up for that is doing extra. You can't just contribute your normal amount next, because then you're not really contributing. So the second scenario was that you have a dominating personality. So there's one person who's taking over and really kind of excluding all the other ideas. So what do we do?
So in that case, typically, like, remind them some sort of element of instrumentality that the team member has something to do to affect, like, effective to say is something. It typically is the one thing that helps with that situation the most.
Yeah.
Just reminding them, hey, like, your team has something to say too.
Right.
Or if it's in the work settings, and if there's someone that is a direct supervisor ahead of them, then involving that third party to remind them would be a helpful decision to make.
Yeah. I mean, those are great suggestions. Anybody else?
Employing a referee, an outsider.
Okay. Yeah.
Providing oversight. Like most groups, we have a faculty member who supervises
Mm-hmm.
as a referee.
Referee or
unbiased.
mediator, yeah. I think that the other thing that, depending on who the person is and the personality that can work here, is to use that, how can I help? And then offer specific things that you can do that would allow you to contribute. Some people who are in this situation, the personality is they're preemptively taking over all the work because they're afraid someone won't do their share. So another way that you might approach this, if that's the situation, is to actually have in real life meetings and you are there contributing and actually doing work rather than letting the person go off and do it all on their own. So I think any way that you can step in and contribute to the group work helps in that case. Now we're going out of order. So one group member did not deliver their portion of the project, and this member contacted one, not the rest of the group, just a couple of hours before the deadline. So this is similar to our first situation. Any other suggestions?
We just say that at that time it's just gathering everyone around and then just delegating tasks and telling everyone, okay, it's before deadline, let's get this in, get it out of the way, and then provide future instruction for that individual on how to do, and future reference for the team themselves to always set up a team charter ahead of time to get that out and done and ready.
Yeah,
So the team charter is even more official than my group work goal setting. Is that right?
Awesome.
So I have seen this. One of the articles that I read had a formal group contract in it, and And so with the legal language and saying, we're agreeing to do this. So having a plan, hopefully will avoid this situation. Having an internal deadline that was earlier will also avoid at least the full-on crisis of this. Situation F, one team member did not understand the APA citation style, so all of their writing has direct quotations rather than paraphrase and summary. So how would we approach that situation?
Sure. So this one is tricky because it goes back to the beginning where the roles were not assigned and the people were not assessed but agreed upon the task that they're going to take over, that they are competent in. So after the fact, the remediation is just helping the person, giving resources that they can rely on, and in the meanwhile you have to fix it because you have a deadline.
Yeah. So hopefully this one didn't happen up against the deadline, and in that case you could also make it a learning moment. This is one of the benefits of group work, is that the person who didn't understand can learn from the rest of the group, and then the whole group knows how to write an APA style and moves forward from there. But in this case, it's particularly important to not just divide and conquer, because if that one person didn't know how to write an APA style and no one proofread and revised that section, the whole group would not do as well. So, okay. You suspect one of the group members is violating academic ethics, for example, plagiarism. What do we do? Yes, this is one of the worst case scenarios.
Say it happened to me once.
What'd you do?
Well, I first just go to the person I said, hey, and this is definitely not acceptable, and I would recommend that you go back and did the work, and of course they always come back with an excuse, and I'm like, okay, all right, I'll give you a couple of days to work on that and see how that turns out.
Yeah.
And then of course I have to involve the third party in, which just end up being it.
Yeah.
And then just pick up the rest of the slack, of course.
So, depending on the particular situation, this could be similar to the previous example, which is why I paired them. It may be a case where one group member doesn't understand that you need to put things in your own words and then cite it, or it could be, I think the best case scenario would be that they did understand, but it was a mistake, that they just missed the typo, and so that was actually your group functioning well, that you caught it in the revision and said, wait a minute, we need to fix this. So as long as the group is doing the job of actually participating fully, where you're not just doing your piece and then slapping it all together, you're actually looking over the whole project and giving constructive feedback, this can actually avoid a worst case scenario in academia and turn it into a learning process. And I hope that I hate hearing that example, but I hope that in most cases, if this happens, that it would be a great learning experience to turn that around. It does highlight what you're saying about needing to take on the responsibility. Every author, if we're writing a paper for a class or if we're actually doing a research publication, every author has this responsibility. You're responsible for reading the sources, knowing what the paper is about, making sure that the data that you're presenting is your data. And so it is important to be involved at the level that you can check this, because particularly in academia, this is, our names are on the line for that. Yeah. So in situation G, there's no clear leader, and tasks and roles are not being assigned. So the outcome of this is the group just says, okay, we can contribute whenever you have time, do some work, and we'll get it together. But this isn't moving the group forward. So what do we do in this situation?
Kind of went with implementing team charter, I guess.
Yeah.
Setting up the expectations,
Right.
tasks, roles,
Yes.
and discussing what people can take on, setting up deadlines.
planning it out and delegating it is crucial in this one. And I think this is a case where you would need a hard reset, because obviously everybody wants to just have a loosey-goosey agreement where you contribute when you have time, but if the progress isn't being made, I think that's when you have a group check-in and you take drastic measures, whether it's a group charter or assigning a leader for each week, but you have to come up with a way to change things. Yeah. Next, we have no one wanting leadership activities, so they don't want to take on that responsibility. So I've grouped the leadership ones together again. What do we do when no one wants to be the leader?
No, we said the same thing, kind of like going back to assigning the roles, like the roles were never assigned. I'm just picturing these poor people going, oh, no, what are you doing? You're like, well, somebody eventually be like, okay, this is what we need to do. But yeah, go back to kind of that assigning the roles and then divvying up the tasks and delegating.
Yeah, so this is another case where you kind of need an intervention at this point, where someone steps in and starts the plan. And I will say with the roles and the leadership role in particular, but all of the group roles that have to happen, it's often beneficial to rotate them throughout the course of a longer process. And so if you have to be the person in this group of four who steps up and says, okay, I'm gonna get us on track, I'm gonna make a plan, it's also okay to say, and I'm gonna do it for 2 weeks, and then the next person is gonna take over, and then that shares the responsibility of leadership and organization. So it doesn't have to be whoever ends up cracking first and stepping up for the leadership role. Your term project is due, and I think this one may be a little bit misworded, but so you are the team member who can't be there when your project is due. And you have an official excused absence, but that said, that's the project deadline. So how do you approach this situation with your teammates in order to have a successful final project? Because you're not even going to be in the state.
Goal setting and then internal planning, just get that done and out of the way, enforcing accountability to get those deadlines would be hard deadlines. So.
Yes. So an internal deadline that's prior to the actual deadline, which is often hard to pull off in a group, but at least in this case, you know it ahead of time. It's something that's on your calendar, and so you need to be planning for it and getting the whole group on board with that deadline. The other key part of this, in addition to the accountability, is the communication. Particularly if it's the final deadline, something really important, getting your grant proposal submitted on time, getting your term project in on time. You need to, as a group, not just do it. Somebody needs to have the responsibility to do it and then let everyone know. So if you're doing it electronically, everyone should be CC'd on that email so you can see that it's submitted. If you're on a Canvas project, you'll be able to see that. But if it's a hard copy and you're out of town, the professional thing for your group members to do is to let you know, I just dropped it off. And if not, when you're out of town, you can send reminders, if nothing else. So the communication is really important there, and in this case, everybody needs to go above and beyond on the communication and accountability to make sure that the people who aren't there for a valid reason know what's happening and that it's been done. One of your group members goes MIA, and this is kind of a regular occurrence. They just stop responding. So this is a real world one. So what do we do when that happens in our groups?
Worst common scenario.
Scream at them over the email.
Microchips.
Yeah.
Get helps.
Get the team together and make a plan B, like, I guess, communicate with everybody else and say this is what's happening and this is where we're lacking to get on our deadline and how can we get back on track and wait till he surfaces.
Yeah, so that's moving forward with it. You have to step up and get it done.
Well, I would recommend you can assign everyone primary task, secondary task, tertiary task,
Yep.
and be willing to reciprocate
Okay.
To fill in.
Yeah, to help fill in. Yeah, I think that could work. I think the other thing to do is to get the group together in person for moving forward, and so you do have to address the issue. It may be one of the lack of getting on the same page at the beginning, not having an appropriate group contract, that you didn't know that person just doesn't do email. And it does happen. I have several students who don't check their emails. And so figure out what communication works for this person and use that instead. So if somebody's not willing to get on email, you may have to switch to chat or something. So figure out a way that you can communicate, or if otherwise they are participating, then making some real life meetings to check in regularly. So having a regular group meeting might be a way to kind of get around the issue with this particular person. Oh. Okay, so what I want to leave you guys with are a few pieces of advice. I think we came up with great suggestions for how to move forward with these somewhat sticky group situations. And my students continually say they want more in real life meetings, even though we're all excited about technology and tend to do more virtual meetings. So I would say the more important thing is to figure out what works for your group. And really that's more about communication, whether it's asynchronous communication and asynchronous working times, or virtual meetings in a group chat, which allows everybody to be comfortable and not have to travel to one place and helps you match schedules. Scheduling is the other big complaint, so figuring out a way to work around that is a good idea. The planning component is really crucial, so regardless of how you decide to communicate and work with your group, do come up with a plan from the outset if it's a long-term group project, and use that project management focus. And I will recommend one resource that I use a lot with my group projects for writing, because writing is sometimes difficult to do in a group, so there's lots of different ways you can do that. So there's a handout at the UNC Writing Center for that. And with that, I will ask if there's any other questions. Thank you guys for coming and participating in groups and applying what you've learned. It was good, yeah.
Super helpful. Super helpful.
And so team management.
I study group processes.
Group processes in psychology or business?
Psychology.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't.
Great.
Yeah, it's actually kind of like all of the things you like talked about really tackle like a group and processes foundation. Going to mark that out, the action phase and then transition phase. Those two pretty crucial, and then there's a couple of research that divide those into a little bit more. Really, you take a lot of like key points.
Great, thanks. I'm glad you waited till the end to tell me.
No, but I mean, we're approaching to the point where doing interdisciplinary teams as well. So
Yeah.
for me, I'm also very interested in hearing what other people outside of my field has to say about groups and teams too, because we can't just stuck in our own head all the time.
Yeah, so my graduate program is an interdisciplinary program, and one of the things that my cohort figured out really quickly was that we had communication issues, because we had people from communications, people from biology, people from geology, and so on. And so our terms, even when we're talking about the same things, our jargon is different. And so we had to do a lot of overcoming that communication barrier when we were first getting together.
It's so broad though. If you're looking at communication and team, it's very hard to kind of narrow down which aspect of it you want to talk to. But generally, meta-analytic evidence do point out that the more you talk to your team and the more information and knowledge you share to your team, it does lead to positive performance of your team outcome. So
Well, do you have any other recommendations for group projects? Have you had a chance to be in charge of one in the teaching setting yet?
Not in the teaching setting, but I did manage my
Your research.
peers and everything. Like I study under Dr. Waltman in
Mhm.
IO psychology, and I just
Great.
kind of like manage one of the group project in there. And just really my motto is like always clear and open communication with the team, letting everybody know what's going on,
Mhm.
delegate tasks, and then like set deadlines to those tasks, and then set clear expectations. So those are the key takeaways in my like
Awesome.
So that is all like process, which is really, sounds great, but where's the emotional component?
The emotional component really, so the emotional component comes into that reward and like at the end, like you really have to remind your team
Okay.
that like, hey, there's something at the end here.
Yeah.
For us, what it is like publications is what we're looking for, and also it's just like having enough money at the end of the semester to go rep reps or something like that. So
Yeah.
So we just remind ourselves of those.
So
and then-
group reward brunch.
Right.
And I'm not, like, honestly, like, my students just want to be done with their projects usually, so, that's a nice addition to actually
Right.
implement a group reward.
Right, I mean, the biggest thing is really just what you mentioned is the internal deadline. Unfortunately, that is the most important thing, and it's even backed up by goal setting theories by Latham in 2009.
Yeah.
But
I know, you're ready to go, I love it.
I'm finishing with my program here.
Yeah.
I should know things.
That's good.
What about team building as a upfront?
Team building. So team building is actually very different than team training. I actually just did a facilitation on that in class the other day. So team building exercise take in many forms. So you can go to escape room is one of them. You can also do just a human knots and also team building exercise. Team charter and team goal setting that you mentioned is a team building exercise, and those are usually the ones that is the most effective to set early on, because that way you set expectations, role clarity, kind of setting up that timeline and planning and all those stuff. Then you also kind of talk about the aspect of communication within the team charter as well, and then who's doing the quality check, what are procedurals for doing those. So those are typical like team building exercise you would do, and team building exercise can be done in any different kind of settings too. Like you can do it in like a field. It doesn't have to be exactly the same environment as your jobs or as your classes, but you can do it anywhere and it will still yield a good result, because the mediating mechanism of team building is through socialization, improving motivations, identifying conflict and solving those conflict, and then clarifying the roles of each individual members within the team.
So, yes, so that was great, because my next question was going to be, so if it's an escape room, could you go to anything, any activity that involves interaction and has a goal that you're trying to get to? Whether it's like a game or a...
Like promoting social interaction, also promoting your team cohesion as well, so it helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, excellent. Well, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for sharing your expertise. That's awesome.
I do.
Yeah.
Start now. Otherwise, all my money within the past 2 years go to waste.
You're getting your master's?
Yes, I'm getting a master and then hopefully going elsewhere for a PhD. So
Oh, PhD somewhere else?
yes, been waiting for my decisions right now.
Yay.
Well, that's exciting.
Thank you.
Thank
you so much.
This
Thanks
was
for
really
coming.
Brooke, that was so awesome.
Yeah.
One of our best workshops.